So today's video is going to be another solved true crime case, another small town murder from the UK. But before we get into this one, I just want to thank our sponsors for making this video possible, Magellan TV. If you haven't heard of Magellan TV before, where have you been? It's a documentary streaming service with thousands of titles on there in a range of different genres, including history, earth, space, and of course, true crime. During the most recent lockdown, I absolutely rinsed the true crime section on Magellan TV. I love the range of topics that they have. They have all like the big serial killer documentaries, and then they also have ones on like different execution methods and life in prison. They also have a lot of conspiracy theory documentaries, because I know a lot of you would like those. They have stuff on like alien abductions, Bigfoot, Yetis. A personal recommendation from me on Magellan TV would be A Monster Among Us. I watched this the other night and I haven't stopped thinking about it since. The documentary follows a police captain in South Africa in a village called Telini, following the story of a serial killer known as the Monster of Telini. And Telini actually became known as the Village of Death. A wild axeman is killing the defenseless people of the village, mothers, grandmothers, children, sneaking into their homes in the dead of night. Over a period of 3 years, over 20 people from this rural village were murdered. In the documentary, there's first-hand accounts and interviews with survivors of this serial killer known as the Monster of Telini. I really recommend it because it's nothing like any other documentary I've ever watched. Like, they went to this little rural village in South Africa and it's all filmed there and based there. It's brilliant. There's new programs added weekly to Magellan TV. There's no ads either, and you can watch on pretty much any device that you have, so what are you waiting for? Use the link down below in the description of this video to start your subscription with Magellan TV and get a whole month for free. You're welcome. And by the way, Magellan TV have a super cool holiday deal going right now where if you buy one gift card, you get a second one completely free, which, you know, could be good Christmas presents if you know any true crime lovers. But yeah, thanks again to Magellan TV for sponsoring this video. Now let's get into it. But before we do, I just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is just for educational purposes, and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. So today's case takes place in Derby in England. The Seggy family were a small family living in Derby, comprising of 59-year-old father Jeff Seggy and his 31-year-old son Daniel Seggy. Jeff Seggy had recently divorced his wife, which was Daniel's mother, and, you know, the two of them ended on pretty good terms. They actually stayed good friends following the split. They would meet up for catch-ups. She actually still took care of Jeff's finances for him. They'd stay in touch via text. It was all very mature, you know. They both just kind of agreed that the marriage wasn't working and maybe they should move on with their lives separately. Anyway, after this split, it left just Jeff and their son Daniel. Now, Daniel, despite having a full-time job and a long-term girlfriend, he didn't feel ready to leave home just yet. And so he had to make the decision on whether he stayed with his mother or his father, and he chose his father. So Jeff and Daniel moved out together. In 2014, they moved onto a quiet little housing estate named Mackworth in Derbyshire, which is in the East Midlands of England. And Mackworth was the typical tight-knit, safe community that you hear about in all of these true crime stories, and that's what makes them all the more shocking, is that you wouldn't expect something so horrific to happen in such a nice place. It was a nice place to raise children in the UK, and you know, it wasn't one of the richest or prettiest places in the whole of England, but it had spirit, it had a good atmosphere. The community was very strong there, you know, it's a decent place to live. 59-year-old Jeff Seggy worked at an available car sales room with his other son. So he actually had two sons, Daniel and another son. I couldn't find his name, but he worked with that other son. And Jeff's family describe him as a hero. He was such a great dad, such an amazing grandfather as well. His other son had children, and Jeff was just such a fun granddad. And his son, 31-year-old Daniel Seggi, was just your average guy. He was very into football, he supported Derby County, and he actually worked full-time at a care home, and everyone loved him in this care home. He was such a kind, sensitive person. He had a long-term girlfriend named Zoe Spence, who actually had 2 children of her own from a previous relationship. However, Daniel really got on with these 2 children, really bonded with them. He wasn't like a second father to them by any means. I don't think he was quite ready for that. However, he did take them out on days out. He bought them presents. You know, he was there. He was their mum's boyfriend, not their stepdad. You know what I mean? So that is the Seggi family. It was Jeff and Daniel living in a home together in Mackworth. Just a normal family. On December 1st, 2016, Daniel and Zoe were planning to go into town to go and do some shopping. It was getting colder, of course, it was getting into winter, and Zoe needed to get some coats and winter boots and things like that for her children, some winter clothes. They'd been planning this day out since the night before. Daniel had been texting Zoe saying, be ready for 10 a.m, you know, make sure you're ready because I don't want to wait around. He was going to come and pick her up and they were going to go to town together. So that morning, Zoe woke up early. She did her makeup, got ready, everything. She was ready for 10 o'clock, but Daniel didn't show up. He had texted her around 9:30 in the morning saying that he was on his way, but she hadn't heard from him since, and he was late now. He was never normally late. So Zoe texted him again saying, hey, where are you? But she got no response. So she waited and waited, and by now it's been a considerable amount of time since he sent that text saying that he was on his way. So now she's getting a little bit worried, thinking, you know, maybe he's been called back into work or something. He often was called back into work, working at a care home. You know, if they're ever short-staffed or they have an emergency and they need more people there, he's got to go in. So Zoe just sent him another text saying, you know, if you're busy or if you've been called back into work, just let me know. Like, there's no rush to go shopping. She just texted him saying, get in contact with me when you can. She understood that, you know, if he can't be on his phone, he can't be on his phone. And she just knew that he would text her when he got a minute. But then as it got into the afternoon and then into the evening, and Zoe still hadn't received a text or a call or anything from Daniel, she started to get a little bit worried. This was not like Daniel Seggi at all. He wasn't the type to make plans, you know, and especially be so persistent about the time. Like, make sure you're ready for 10 because I want to go at 10, and then just ghost on those plans. He wasn't like that. And it was then that Zoe looked at her phone and realised that her texts hadn't even been sending anymore. They just said delivered. So his phone hadn't even been receiving them. Maybe his phone was dead or switched off. Again, very unlike him, very worrying. And so Zoe decided to go and get in her car and go look for him, go to his house, see if he's there or if he's just ignoring her or what. So around 8 p.m. on the 1st of December, Zoe gets in her car and heads to the home that Daniel shared with his father, Jeff. However, when Zoe arrived, she was met with a cordoned off crime scene. There was tape up, there were police cars, an ambulance, police standing around at the tape, walking in and out of the house. So she quickly parked her car and rushed over to see what was going on. This was her boyfriend's house. It was all taped up. There were police everywhere. He wasn't answering his phone. She ran around asking every single police officer that she could get hold of at that scene, asking them what had happened inside, what was going on, but none of them could tell her at this point. Of course, Zoe kept trying to get any information from any of them. She was asking every single one until finally one of them told her that a body had been found inside that house. So she keeps trying to get more information out of them. However, Zoe wasn't a member of Daniel or Jeff's family, and she also wasn't married to either of them, and that proposes a lot of issues. You know, police can't give out that kind of information unofficially, just standing at a crime scene. They can't just tell a member of the public unless they can be proven to be family or married. And so police couldn't tell Zoe anything else. All she knew was that her boyfriend hadn't been answering his phone all day, and now a body had been found in his house. And you can only imagine what she's thinking. Police told her that they would get in contact with her when they were allowed to give her some information. There was no point in her staying at the crime scene. She should just go home and rest until they contact her. So Zoe gets back in her car and goes to her parents' house, and she said that none of it felt real. It all felt like a dream. She had no answers and just so many thoughts racing through her head. By the following morning, police had set up a forensics tent in the front garden of the house, and people were going in the house with like full hazmat suits on. And it was clear to the whole estate that something very, very serious had happened in there, and rumours were going round, as you would expect. People saying that there'd been a fight and someone had died. People saying it was a robbery gone wrong. But all neighbours knew was that a body had been found in that house. It was clearly suspicious circumstances because there was a forensics tent there. There were police everywhere. But police were still saying nothing. No one knew anything for sure. Daniel's girlfriend Zoe tried to get in touch with Daniel's mother at this point, Jeff's ex-wife, just hoping that maybe she had heard anything because she is immediate family. Maybe police had told her something, but she said that she didn't know anything yet. However, she did tell Zoe that she was actually the one that had called the police. She'd actually called them for a welfare check on the house. Because like I said, Jeff worked with his other son that wasn't Daniel, and every single morning the two of them would go to work together, and then in the evening they would come home together. And every single morning around 7 a.m. they would have a phone call, a daily phone call, just to see how they were that day, if they were going to work, you know. However, for the last 2 days, Jeff hadn't made that phone call and hadn't shown up at work, which was very, very unlike him. Jeff was one of those people that no matter how he was feeling, if he was feeling deathly ill, he would still go to work. He was one of those people that just powered through it. And so this was immediately odd and immediately something that worried both his ex-wife and his other son, that he wasn't answering his phone and that he wasn't going to work. And so his ex-wife actually called the police and asked for them to perform a welfare check on the Seggy home, just to make sure that he and Daniel were okay. When police first got to the house to perform the welfare check, they knocked on the door, but no one came. And so they were knocking on the windows, they were shouting in like, look, it's the police, let us in. But no one was in, no one was coming to the door. Now with these welfare checks, police actually aren't allowed to leave until they see and speak to the person that they are there to check on and make sure that they're safe and well. Either that, or if they're sure that the person isn't there at the house, then police are of course allowed to leave. So they had to make their way inside to make sure that either Jeff was there and they could speak to him, or that Jeff wasn't there and that they had to check somewhere else. They are not allowed to leave until they've confirmed that that person is either okay or not at the premises. And so they tried the door themselves. They just tried the door handle to see if they could let themselves in. However, the door was locked. And so despite the house being locked, they were there for a welfare check, and so they had to get in. So they decided to knock the door down and let themselves in. They got into the downstairs area and there was no sign of anyone. They were shouting for Daniel, they were shouting for Jeff, but no one was answering, no one was coming downstairs, no one said anything. The house was silent. And so that was when the police team decided to go upstairs to the bedrooms, and there they discovered a horrific scene. 59-year-old Jeff Seggy was laying naked on his bed, covered in blood, and with a visible huge range of different injuries all over his body. There was blood all over the room, all over the bed. Detectives noted that there was absolutely no attempt made to either dispose of the body or even hide the body in any way. Whoever had done this had simply just done the attack and left. They hadn't so much as covered Jeff's body with anything, which already said a lot immediately because this man was naked. It seemed as though he had been caught while he was getting changed because his old clothes were on the floor, his pajamas were on the bed. It looked as though he was just about to get changed, and whoever had killed him like this hadn't cared to give him that last piece of dignity to kind of cover his body or anything. His autopsy showed that Jeff Seggy had been stabbed over 60 times with a knife in the kind of chest, neck, some even on his face. But that wasn't even the extent of it. He had a further 20-some injuries on top of that seemed to have been inflicted with a hammer. So not only was he stabbed to death, he was then, after that, his killer picked up a hammer and carried on beating him. Pathologists were able to tell from Jeff Seggy's body, based on the rate of rigor mortis and things like that he had actually been laid dead in that bed for 3 days at this point. So in the first upstairs bedroom, police come across this horrific scene of Jeff Seggy murdered in his own house. But he wasn't the only person that police were there to check on. Where was Daniel Seggy? So police went to check Daniel's bedroom, fearing that they would come across a very similar scene. However, when they walked in, no one was there. Daniel wasn't there. His room was perfectly intact. He didn't seem to be in the house at all. So what could have happened to him? Where could Daniel be now? As well as a murder inquiry into Jeff Seggy's death. Immediately when the Seggy family found out that Daniel was missing, they all feared that he was abducted by the same people that had done this to his father. Maybe they'd taken him because they felt that they could get money out of him, or, you know, demand a ransom or something like that. Or worse, maybe Daniel had already met the same fate that his father had. And all of these thoughts are racing through Zoe's head. She never once thought that Daniel could be responsible for his father's death. It was always in her mind that he had to be innocent because he was such a good guy. She loved him. This was the man that she loved, and she never expected him to do anything like that. And so to her, that was the only explanation, that Daniel was also in danger, that he was also at risk of dying the same way that his father had at the hands of the same people that had done that to his father. However, immediately to police, they have a man that's been brutally murdered, and the person that he lives with, his son, is nowhere to be found. And Jeff Seggy's car was actually nowhere to be found either. So it seemed as though maybe Daniel had done this and then taken off in his father's car, stolen his father's car, and now he was on the run. So police now decided to speak with different members of the Seggy family, different friends, different, you know, colleagues, anyone that could give them a bit of insight into these two men's relationship, and also just those two men in general and the family. And, you know, police just needed a greater idea of the picture that they were looking at. First person that was interviewed as part of this investigation was actually Daniel's mother, Jeff's ex-wife, who was in regular contact with both the men. And one of the first things she said to police was that she believed that her son Daniel had been impersonating Jeff for the last few days. On the first day that she realised that this was going on, it was actually because her son, so Jeff's other son that he worked with, received a text from his father saying that he was ill and that he wasn't going to go to work. He was just going to go back to bed. Which, like I said, immediate red flag, because Jeff never had a sick day from work ever. He didn't believe in sick days. He was the type to turn up no matter how he was feeling. So immediately that was odd. First of all, that he'd even called in sick, but second of all, that he hadn't called his son to say that. The fact that he sent it through a text was also unusual. Jeff was much more of a talking on the phone kind of guy than a texting kind of guy. I mean, the circumstances surrounding it were pretty odd, but his family just kind of accepted that he was ill. Maybe he didn't want to talk on the phone because he was so ill, and so they just left him to it. However, it was even more suspicious the following day because, like I said, he would have a regular phone call with his other son at 7 a.m. every single morning. Now, 7 a.m. rolls around the following day, his son gets a call, but it doesn't sound like Jeff on the phone. It sounded like Daniel pretending to be Jeff. And the other son thought this was so weird. He couldn't understand why Daniel would do that. You know, this wasn't in a jokey way. It wasn't, you know, he was genuinely pretending to be his father, but they didn't have the same voice. It was so obvious that it wasn't Jeff. So obviously the other son and Jeff's ex-wife had been talking about this and talking about how weird this was. And then Jeff's ex-wife remembered a text that she'd received from Jeff a couple of days prior asking for £100 to be moved between his accounts because, like I said, she helped him take care of his finances, and she thought that that was kind of odd as well. And then she realised that Jeff hadn't been sounding like himself for the past few days. It was just a very odd circumstance. They asked Daniel if they could speak to Jeff, and he just kind of avoided it. He made excuses, whatever. And so Jeff's ex-wife finally decided that this was all just too weird. This was odd. She didn't understand why Jeff wasn't getting in contact, and that is why she called for the welfare check. I don't think they ever expected to find what they found. I don't think they expected to find out that Jeff had been murdered and Daniel was now missing. But I think they could sense that something was wrong, and they did the right thing, calling for a welfare check. However, as soon as police heard this information that Daniel had been impersonating his murdered father for the last few days, that certainly sounds another level of suspicious. Had Daniel murdered his own father and then tried to impersonate him for a few days, and then once he realised that he couldn't get away with it and people were suspicious of him, had he then stolen his father's car and fled? Because if that was the case, he could be anywhere by now. It had been a few days. So the homicide team decided to split up into a few different teams so that they could tackle this case from all angles. Some of them were trying to track Daniel's credit card information to see like where his different bank transactions had been over the past few days. Another team was looking for CCTV videos from around the area around the time of the murder to see if he'd been up to anything. And another team decided to focus on tracking down that stolen car. And they did this using license plate tracking recognition things in like the speed cameras and stuff like that. They can track every single license plate that's gone through them, and with that they can track where that car has been in the country. They were able to track Jeff Seggy's stolen Honda Civic being driven from Derby down through Staffordshire and then to Cardiff, where it was eventually abandoned in a car park, and out of that car gets Daniel Seggy. He gets out the car, closes the door and just walks off and doesn't return. That car was still in that car park when police received this case. So it was clear that Daniel had just abandoned it and his plan was to move on with a different mode of transport. And around this time that he abandoned the car, he also switched off his mobile phone. So they couldn't get any signal, they couldn't track him using that either. It's clear that he didn't want to be traced. Leaving the car in a car park, switching his phone off, it's clear that he is now on the run. And this pretty much confirmed to police that they had the right guy and they were on the right track. So all police know now is that Daniel Seggy got out of the car in Cardiff somewhere, but now he could be anywhere. Right now he's travelling on foot with no kind of tracking information or anything to trace on him. So it was going to be pretty hard to follow where he went after he got out of the car in Cardiff, but teams were working on it. However, in the meantime, of course, the Seggy home was being searched. Forensic searchers, normal police searchers trying to find any different pieces of evidence, maybe in Daniel's room, maybe in the living room. And that was when they found in Daniel's bedroom the brand new packaging of a knife that had been cut open and hidden under his bed, between the bed and the wall. It was clear that Daniel didn't want anyone to find this brand new packaging, which also borderline confirmed to the police that Daniel Seggy had purchased a brand new knife with the intention of murdering his father. This hadn't been a spur of the moment, pick up a knife from the kitchen and kill his father. Thought had gone into this. He'd bought a brand new, sharp knife. And right now, police didn't know if that was the only weapon that Daniel Seggy had. He could have multiple more weapons on his person, and now he's on the run. Police have no idea where he is. He is a potential danger to so many other people. So police decided to go and speak with his girlfriend, Zoe Spence, who they felt would be a big help in this case. Zoe knew Daniel the best. She knew the kind of places that he might go. She knew if he had any specific ties to any different locations in the UK. They just felt like she was going to be the biggest help in this case. So they asked her if over the past few days Daniel had said anything or done anything that was kind of odd to her, and she said that he had. A few days prior to him going missing, Zoe said that she'd received a message from him saying that he'd been to A&E to receive stitches for a cut on his hand. Daniel told her that he'd got this cut at work. He'd cut it on a knife or something, making sandwiches, and he had to be rushed to hospital for stitches, for an injection, for painkillers, and he sent her a text. This is a paraphrased version of that text, but it read, "Just got home from bloody A&E, sliced my finger open. I've I've got 5 stitches, lol. I haven't moaned once. I've been a brave little soldier, lol. And like I said, based on Jeff's autopsy, they were able to predict that he was murdered 3 days prior to when they found him. And guess when this message was sent? Around that exact same time. If Daniel was the killer, which police believe that he was, could he have injured himself in the process? You hear this a lot with true crime cases where, you know, someone's using a blade, they're stabbing someone so many times that blood is going everywhere, it's getting all over their hand gets slippery, and they grab the blade. Their hand slips from the handle to the blade, and they grab it, and it causes a cut on their own hand. And what an eerie way for Daniel Segui to explain this to his girlfriend, to explain this injury that he'd sustained, saying that he was a brave little soldier, saying LOL so many times when he knew that he'd got that injury from murdering his father. So police knew that their best bet of being able to track down Daniel Segui at this moment, now that he'd turned his phone off, now that he'd ditched the car, was to gain his trust and get him to give himself up or give over his location. And they knew that the best way to do that was through his girlfriend, Zoe. Of course, Zoe was apprehensive about this whole thing. However, police explained to her that, you know, she needed to do this. She needed to bring her boyfriend into police's custody and get him off the streets because he could be a danger to so many people out there right now. He could have been armed, he could have had however many weapons on him, and they don't know what mental state he's in right now. He's just committed his first murder. And who knows, he could be, you know, in that mental state where he's just going to keep going and keep going and keep going until he's caught. Maybe this was a race against time, just until he commits his second murder and then his third. Or even if he wasn't planning on committing another murder, what was his plan? Was he gonna just live off the grid and never get a job again and never, you know, live in society again? How is he gonna get money that way? Through more criminal activity? Through armed robberies? Through burglaries? Police just explained to her that not only would she be keeping the whole of society safe from Daniel, but she would also be keeping Daniel safe from whatever life he was heading for after this incident. And there was also the fear, you'll see later on in this video, that Daniel was going to take his own life as part of this. Maybe that was where this case was ending up, and Zoe knew that. And so she agreed with police that she was gonna try and get him to give himself in. She knew it was breaking that trust that Daniel had in her, but she knew that it was the right thing, both for the rest of the UK and potentially the rest of the world, and for Daniel himself. And so they got to work, and Zoe Spence was holed up in the police station for hours every single day, talking to Daniel Segui on social media. It seemed that he was like signing in probably through like pay-as-you-go computers in like cafes or hotels or anything like that. Like he was still managing to use social media, although he wasn't on his phone. Or maybe he'd gotten a new phone, like a pay-as-you-go phone, something. Somehow he was managing to use the internet. And the ultimate end goal was either to get Daniel to give himself in at a police station or to give Zoe his location so that police knew where to go and arrest him at. However, police knew that they weren't about to get this information so easily. As this operation was underway back at the police station, other police teams were trolling through hours of CCTV footage from Cardiff town centre, Cardiff city centre. They were looking at all the kind of major places there to see where Daniel could have gone after he got out of that car. So they were looking at nearby streets, they were looking at big supermarkets, Tesco's, things like that, because he might have needed food. They were looking at train stations in case he tried to go somewhere else. And they were literally just hoping for the best. There was absolutely no guaranteeing that they would see Daniel Segui on any of this footage. They were just kind of hoping that he was still somewhere in Cardiff and that they would see him and then be able to track him from there. And finally, against all the odds, they actually spot him on this CCTV footage buying a train ticket with cash in Cardiff train station, which is good news and also bad news. Good news that, you know, they've found him, they can trace him, they can see what train he got on and see where he got off, but also bad news, he could be anywhere in the UK right now. So their next step was to figure out what train ticket he'd bought, what train he'd boarded, and where he'd gotten off of that train, like which stop he'd gotten off on the way. But one thing that my favourite psychologist, Emma Kenny, pointed out about this footage was that Daniel Segui has no belongings on him. He's not carrying anything. He doesn't have a bag or anything. He doesn't even have a jacket or a coat. Bear in mind, this is like the 1st of December, the 2nd of December. This is the middle of winter, and this suggests that maybe he doesn't have a plan to keep living. Maybe his intention was that he was going to end his own life. If your plan is that you're gonna run away and you're gonna start a new life somewhere, surely you would take something from home. A spare change of clothes, maybe a wash bag, toothbrush, anything. But he didn't take anything with him. This man just has nothing. It's just him and his wallet. But before police could even make any more advancements, before they could even find out which train he'd gotten on and where he'd gotten off, they actually made contact with Daniel Segui himself through his girlfriend Zoe. On December the 5th, around 7 p.m. in the evening, so this was around 6 days after the murder, he sent Zoe a message saying the following, and this is quite long. "I'm sorry, I honestly don't know what's happening. My heart is broken, but also my mind. I've no idea what has happened this past week. It's like I've been asleep for a week and woken up in a nightmare. I'm so confused and scared, I honestly don't know what to do. All I want to do is hug you. I love you and the boys," her kids, "forever. Never forget that. You're not just my girlfriend, you're my best friend, and I love you." So with police's help, Zoe responded to this message, something that would gain his trust, but also, try and get his location out of him. Because while they didn't want to jump straight in and be like, "Where are you? Where can we find you?" This was a race against time. They didn't want to push him away, but they couldn't dawdle, they couldn't, waste time. They needed that location fast. So Zoe and the police responded to that message saying, "I'm really worried about you, Dan. Please don't be scared. The boys and I want to see you. Where are you now?" 24 hours later, Daniel responded, "I really want to see you too, but I can't. I'm so far away and I can't remember how I got here. I have no money to get home. My wallet is gone and I'm all alone. I wish I was with you. I'm so sorry." Now, there's a lot of messages, so I'm gonna start paraphrasing from here on. I don't want to be reading out the same stuff over and over again because he repeats himself a lot as well. I'll tell you certain significant quotes as they come up, but his next message was essentially just everything he's already said, that he's alone and that he's confused and scared, just all of that just reworded. He mentions that he's somewhere really high up north and ends the message with, "I don't want you to worry. I will be okay and I love you." So Zoe replied something like, "It doesn't sound like you're okay. We all miss you. I'm losing sleep over this. Like, hurry up and come home. I won't be okay until I know that you're okay." So Daniel said, "I'm sorry. I wish I could come home and give you all a hug, but I can't." And he ended that message with, "I am safe, I think, but I need to work out what to do." Now, this could have gone on for hours, this conversation, because all he was saying was that he loved her and that he's confused and he's alone and he's tired and, all he wants to do is hug her. This could have gone backwards and forwards for a long time. So police decided to switch things up and they decided to come at it from the angle that Zoe was going to come and pick him up. She said, "If you want a hug from me, I will come and pick you up. So give me a location." And this was police using what they thought was his soft spot. It was Zoe. It was Zoe and the kids. He wanted to be back with them. That was his comfort, and he needed a comfort right now. He keeps saying that he's confused, he's alone, he's tired, and he's worried, and what he needs is his support, his comfort. And so if they think if they can offer him Zoe, he will give her his location so that she can come pick him up and give him that hug that he so desperately needs. Finally, after much back and forth, Daniel reveals to Zoe that he had travelled all the way up to Glasgow in Scotland. Literally pretty much the highest north that you can get. So police were on it. The Derby police contacted Glasgow police and just informed them of this whole situation, this whole case, and told them to not only be on the lookout, but be ready to go and arrest him as soon as they receive any kind of location. By now, the Derby police force had gathered as much as they possibly could, CCTV, bank transaction details, everything like that, to try and piece together a timeline of Daniel Segui's life, the last few days since he murdered his father. So this is exactly what the Derby police told the Glasgow police had happened over the last few days. The autopsy into Jeff Seggy's death placed his murder at around 10 or 11 p.m. that night. This was as he was going to bed. It explains why his body was found naked, because like I said, his clothes were found on the floor, his pajamas were close by, so it was as if he was getting changed for bed. He was attacked at a very vulnerable moment, which also makes it seem like it was Daniel Seggy. Not that we need any more evidence against him at this point, but it's unlikely that a robbery gone wrong is going to wait for the perfect time that someone is at their most vulnerable. However, if you live in that house with the person and you're planning on killing them that night, you're gonna just hang around for a bit and wait for them in their most vulnerable state when they're getting changed. So yeah, Jeff Seggy was murdered around 10 or 11 p.m. that night, and as we can see from Daniel's bank statement information, he actually left the house pretty much straight after that, went into town and bought a Chinese takeaway. He then brought that food back to the home where he just murdered his own father, sat downstairs and ate it, while his father's dead body is just above him. Around 2 a.m, so this is about 3 or 4 hours after the murder, Daniel Seggy goes to A&E and messages Zoe about how he's getting 5 stitches in his finger. It seems as though, you know, obviously he got this during the attack, but maybe he just hoped that it had stopped bleeding by itself, and then maybe 2-3 hours later he's realizing it's not going to stop bleeding by itself and maybe he does need medical attention. He was avoiding going to hospital at all costs there, because then there's explanations, you know, then it's on record that he's got an injury on his hand, you know? He didn't want to have to go to hospital, and maybe that's why he put it off for so long. It gets to the 3-4 hour mark, he realizes he needs stitches, so he goes to A&E. He sent his girlfriend Zoe a picture of his finger saying that he was a brave little soldier, and then he returned home and went to bed and slept a few rooms away from his father's decomposing body. The following morning, Daniel woke up knowing that his father had a daily call with his brother. Like I said, 7 a.m. every single morning, Jeff would call his other son, and Daniel knew, you know, the other son is going to start calling soon, and he needed to come up with something fast, a reason as to why his father wouldn't be on the phone that morning. So he texted his brother off his father's phone, posing as Jeff, saying that he was ill and that he wasn't going to go to work that day and he was just going to go back to bed. So that was an excuse not to have this call, and, you know, so that his brother didn't turn up at the house to pick his father up for work. And it was at this point that his family started getting a little bit suspicious, because this was very unlike Jeff to ever miss a day of work, and also to communicate through text. He was more of a phone call kind of guy. Daniel then texted his own mother off Jeff's phone, so his ex-wife, because like I said, his ex-wife still took care of all of his finances, and he asked, as Jeff, if his ex-wife could move £100 from his savings account to his current account because he needed some extra money this month, and she said that she would. She didn't think much of it because, you know, she took care of his finances. This wasn't weird. However, later that day, just a few hours later, Daniel Seggy had his father's bank card and he was withdrawing this £100 in cash from an ATM in town. After that, Daniel Seggy then goes to his closest McDonald's, gets himself some dinner before returning to the home that he shared with his father while his father's body was still decomposing in his bedroom. Still, not one attempt has been made to dispose or at least cover this body. Psychologists have pointed out that at this stage, this has been almost a full 24 hours now since the murder. For Daniel to not feel an overwhelming urge to dispose of the body, that shows that on some level, he is at peace with what he's done. He's not disgusted or ashamed in his actions. If he was, he wouldn't want to know that he's living in the same house as the dead body of his father. But he doesn't seem to care at all. He's absolutely fine living in the same house, sleeping a few doors down from his father's dead body. And that shows a true disconnect with what he's done. Daniel Seggy is potentially such a dangerous person because he doesn't have that remorse or that empathy or, you know, he doesn't realise that what he's done is the absolute worst thing a human can do, you know? He's absolutely fine living with what he's done here. Once again, Daniel goes to sleep in his bedroom a couple of doors away from where his father's body lay in the bed. He wakes up the following morning, and Daniel now begins to make the preparations for when he would flee. The first thing he did that morning was drive to the bank and draw out £300 in cash from his own account this time. And he's talking with the cashier, he's laughing, he's joking, which is so odd that this man is a murderer, an uncaught murderer, and this woman has no idea. She's joking with him, she's laughing with him. He then gets back in the car. When he goes back home, that is when he has this phone call with his brother pretending to be his father, and I think he came away from that phone call knowing that that was it, that he'd just messed up horrifically and now his family are onto him. So as soon as he finishes that phone call, he goes and gets in his father's car, his father's Honda Civic, and drives. And just drives and drives and drives until he gets to Cardiff, where he abandons the car. He then purchased a train ticket in Cardiff train station to Glasgow, and within 7 hours he was in Scotland. We don't know for what reason he decided to go to Scotland. He was probably just looking at the board in the train station thinking, well, where's the furthest away from here that I can get to? The full top of the UK. Once he arrived at Glasgow station, he then bought another train ticket for another place in Scotland. And this was a town called Thurso, which is on the very tip-top coast of Scotland, literally the highest north, pretty much, that you can get. He's physically trying to get as far away from what he's done as he possibly can. Whether that's because he is now starting to feel some kind of remorse, some kind of feeling towards it, or whether that's just because he thinks that's his best chance at, you know, not being caught. So he buys this train ticket to Thurso. However, because this is, you know, just a random town at the top of Scotland, they don't have trains that run there every single day, and this train that he bought a ticket for wasn't going to leave for another 2 days. So he had another 2 days in Glasgow. So Daniel went and found a hotel called the Jury's Inn in Glasgow, and he camps out there for 2 days. And it's when he gets to this hotel that he begins making contact with Zoe. Maybe they had computers in the lobby that you could kind of pay as you go, and that's how he began speaking to her. In between these Facebook messages with Zoe, Daniel was also searching up some very interesting things, you know, previous murder investigations that the UK has had, how police dealt with those murder investigations. He's trying to figure out what the police's next steps will be in terms of trying to find him so that he can be one step ahead of them. He wanted to know how the police went about this and how he could avoid them. So by now, police had got Daniel Segui in a place where he trusted Zoe. He felt as though Zoe was genuine, she wasn't in contact with the police, and that she was genuinely just going to come up to Glasgow, give him this hug that he wanted, and potentially bring him back down to Derby. He'd already told her that he was in Glasgow, and now they just needed that final piece of information. Where was he in Glasgow? And they finally received that around 3 a.m, that he was in the Jury's Inn Hotel in Glasgow, and that was the last interaction that he would ever have with his girlfriend Zoe, because as soon as he'd sent that message, Derby police had let Glasgow police know his exact location, and they went straight there and arrested him on that day. Daniel Segui was transported from Glasgow down to Derby once again for his questioning. However, all the way through his initial interview, he didn't say anything. He gave nothing up. All he was saying was no comment. But, you know, even though this questioning was relatively unsuccessful, they were hoping they were just going to get a confession. They didn't really need it anyway, you know? He'd fled for however many days. There was the evidence of the knife packaging in his bedroom. There was just so much evidence here. And so police wasted no time in charging Daniel Segui for his father's murder, and a trial date was set. So the way that trials go is that there's kind of a pre-trial court appearance where the defendant will go and they will either plead guilty or not guilty. If they plead not guilty, then it has to go to a trial where a jury is brought in and then they decide if they're guilty or not guilty. However, if the defendant just chooses to plead guilty at this pre-trial court hearing, then it doesn't need to go to trial because they've already said they're guilty. Just send him to prison. A lot of killers, specifically serial killers, Daniel Segui wasn't a serial killer, but a lot of criminals that are proud of their work will choose to plead not guilty. Even though they know they're guilty, they'll plead not guilty because they want a trial. They want the attention. They want to prolong this for as long as they possibly can. But not Daniel Segui. At this first pre-trial court appearance, he decided to plead guilty to the murder of his own father. In May of 2017, 31-year-old Daniel Segui was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. But the question that police and his family and his loved ones were left with was why? Why did Daniel do this? What was his motive to murder his own father in such a brutal way with so much overkill as well? 60 stab wounds and a further 20 wounds given to him with this hammer. Like, what is the reason for this? This was the man that gave him life, that gave him a roof over his head, food on the table for 31 years, and this is how his son repays him. This was such a shocking case because even to his friends and family, they never saw Daniel like this. They never at all expected this. You would have thought that because this seemed to come out of nowhere, there had to have been some kind of underlying reason, you know, maybe some abuse in the household, whether it had been Daniel to his father or his father to Daniel. It didn't even seem like this was an argument that had gotten out of hand because it seemed as though Daniel Segui had bought a new knife for that exact reason, to murder his father with. So what had come over Daniel Segui? I'm not aware of any mental illnesses that Daniel might have had. Maybe I just couldn't find that in my research, but I can see that he didn't get any time reduced from his sentence for any level of mental illness, so maybe that's not the case. Some people do just snap one day. You know, maybe something drives them to a point where they're just angry and they do this. Daniel Segui claims that he has no recollection of the murder and he himself can't explain how or why it happened. He doesn't remember doing it, and so he can't explain why he did it either. Daniel Segui's girlfriend, Zoe Spence, has actually since said that she will always stick by him, she will always defend him, and she will remember the good times that they had and try to block out the memory of this incident, which I think is a very odd note to end this on. But anyway, that is all I have on this case. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks again to Magellan TV for sponsoring this video. If you click the link down below in my description, Magellan TV are offering you guys a month free when you sign up using my link, so enjoy that. And like I said, they're doing buy one, get one free on the gift cards at the moment, so Christmas presents, get them in. Just a quick reminder that I have a brand new second channel that I'm posting on every single week. I'm so excited to start getting some content out on there. Give me some ideas over in the comments on that channel if you have anything in particular that you want to see from me. Huge thank you to all of my channel members for helping me decide the cases that I cover, especially my tier 2 members whose names are all on screen right now. If you want to become a channel member, you can just click the join button on a desktop, or there'll be a link in the description of this video. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure you leave a big thumbs up on this video. I would really appreciate it. If you want to subscribe, you can click right here using this little circle. If you want to subscribe to my second channel, you can click the link right here in this circle. Or if you want to watch another true crime video from me, there's a playlist on screen right here. Bye!